Lost Canadians bill. You've not yet gotten an extension from the court to pass that legislation. What happens if that doesn't come through? Like, what is the procedure over the next week?
Well, if it doesn't come through, we're sort of in no man's land. Basically, it's my discretion deciding who's Canadian or not. Obviously, that shouldn't be up to the discretion of a minister. There needs to be a framework in which these lost Canadians that are entitled to be Canadians and had their identity, citizenship taken away from them by the previous government are entitled to become Canadians again. So ideally, that law would go through. Courts typically have been deferential to the parliamentary process, but obviously it's their discretion and their jurisdiction to state something. So we will put our best foot forward and hope for the best. But what we don't want to find ourselves in is really in a no man's land.
Yeah. Is there any sort of penalties or anything for missing that deadline?
I mean, the reality is the court's judgment, as comprehensive as it was, leaves an open space to interpretation as to who is entitled to that. And not everyone is entitled to be Canadian. There should be some criteria that we put forward, and I think that's properly contained in the bill that we set forth.
I want to ask you as well about the latest comments from Premier Eby that we got a statement from today. He said that the comments yesterday about this being about asylum seekers was disingenuous, that the number of asylum seekers in BC is growing, and of course they're also feeling other impacts from immigration at large. What is your response to this sort of latest message from the Premier?
Well, he's entitled to his opinion. I think the facts about asylum seekers in BC as a proportion of what Ontario and Quebec are taking in speak for themselves. It is much lower in BC. We actually need them at the table to work with us on properly spreading out asylum seekers across Canada. Actually have a great working relationship with Premier Eby, very thoughtful person. We've worked well in the previous file that I was on Indigenous matters, and have a good working relationship when we were talking about some of the work that they're doing in reining in that runaway train around international students. They've done some great work, and often we have and are very much on the same wavelength. I think to say that when you're talking about an announcement that dealt specifically with costs related to asylum seekers, that it's not about that, well, then there's a different discussion about BC's financial share and proportion of money that it gets from the federal government is a discussion that involves a lot of other ministers than me. Clearly, in terms of what he referenced, the announcements in Ontario on car battery plants, BC stands to benefit from that. I visited a lithium company that has a direct investment or a direct stake in those battery companies being successful from BC, composed almost entirely of immigrants with PhDs. So let's talk about the value of immigration, specifically in the production chain for cars of the future, EV cars. So, there's a nexus there, but let's not confuse apples and oranges. This announcement in Quebec was about compensation for asylum seekers over 2 fiscal years. Quebec is entitled to compensation, as well as accrued work with the Government of Canada, where we need all provinces on board to deal with a problem that is not going away, and that is one that, yes, is a volume, and I don't think BC is exempt from some of the effects of immigration generally, but I think it's important to have a nuanced, reasonable conversation about that.
Did these comments catch you off guard at all, given that you just recently met with all of the immigration ministers in Montreal? I mean, these comments coming from Western premiers about fairness in terms of cash for immigration settlement, is that something that they've raised before?
It's hard to be caught off guard by anything these days. Certainly surprising from a progressive premier. But again, there's work to be done around the table. We've had a great working relationship with him. We absolutely need him and his team at the table for the next stage of things, which is making sure we're doing a fair apportionment of asylum seekers across Canada, where Ontario and Quebec have been taking on a disproportionate portion of asylum seekers in the Federation.
What do you make of his proposal that there should be money apportioned on a per capita or GDP basis?
Well, what we've had in the last few years is one where we've had municipalities or various jurisdictions looking for money in the interim housing assistance program. BC hasn't drawn from that. Per capita is fine, but they also have to be taking their per capita share of the asylum seekers that are coming in. We certainly don't invite asylum seekers to come in. They choose their port of entry, sometimes at desperate cost and at great expense to them, at a personal lives are sometimes in jeopardy, and sometimes people are not entitled to claim refugee status, but that's done as a matter of due process. And so some places have a disproportionate portion of asylum seekers per the population. Ontario and Quebec are among those.
Thanks, Mr.
Thank you.